Good day. I'm going to do a Module 2 mini lecture now, just kind of get us started to thinking about theory. So unlike other subfields of political science, theory is a little bit different because it really pulls from more the philosophy side of things, and it focuses on a normative logical approach, whereas so many other of the subfields of political science really pull on more of the sciences. So one way to look at this is just to note that whereas a lot of political science is based on descriptive sort of findings, research, it has to do more with like, you know, sort of the classic research, building on previous theories, all that kind of stuff. Um, Political theory is far more prescriptive. It deals with should um, rather than is. um, which is a little bit odd for most political science, because a lot of times with political science, we're trying to, quote, look at the world the way it is, which would be descriptive, whereas prescriptive seeks to change the world, for lack of a better word. Now, this isn't all theories necessarily. Some of the original political theories believed themselves to be descriptive. Realism and liberalism, for example, attempt to tell the way the world is. Um, However, after looking back, hundreds of years later, we can clearly see that they were not descriptive, but rather prescriptive, in that they were theories about human behavior and political behavior and all that. So one fun aspect about theory is that if you kind of look at the bare bones approach to theory, it really seeks to answer some of the most fundamental questions of political science, questions that a lot of the other subdisciplines don't really get to ask. For example, is there a human nature? And if so, what is it? Are human beings inherently selfish, or are they inherently cooperative? Is there a political nature? Does political nature spawn from human nature? What ways are there to govern, and which ones are the best? And while other political science branches can measure, data and look at statistics and stuff, and we can say, well, you know, um, democracies are more successful in the following six categories. Um, there is no answer to, well, which governing system, which institution is best. But theory can come back and say, oh, well, this is best, um, based on, ethics, morals, logic. And those are tools that the more sciencey part of political science doesn't really get to use. Theory also gets to look at, hypotheticals, extremes, theories, such as, well, what does anarchy look like, or what does, utopianism look like? Because those don't exist in the real world, the more science branches of political science can't really look at them, because we wouldn't even begin to know where to look. If you're like, okay, well, let's pick a utopian society and study what that looks like. Well, since no one can necessarily agree on what a utopian society looks like, there's no way to study one. But theorists can theorize. Well, Plato says it's his republic. Like, okay, well, that's what utopianism looks like. Um, so the political theory does get to ask sort of, I guess, maybe more interesting questions that don't really have concrete answers, but theorists get to answer them, um, because they're theories. So then the question becomes, well, if theory is all theory, then how does it affect anything else? How is it even part of political science if it doesn't affect the real world? Um, And the answer to that is, well, it can affect the real world. And while some political scientists say, well, political theory isn't really political science, it's some, political philosophy branch. If you look at things like, well, identity politics, right? What makes a person? Um, what what gives one person the right to enslave another or kill another? Human rights. Are there rights that we're just born with, just because we're human? Who should have power? Cognitive dissonance. How do we deal with the world when the world doesn't appear to be the way we think the world is? Um, Concepts of sovereignty. Who rules and why? And why does that person continue to rule, or why does that country continue to rule? And so, even though the models are prescriptive, and we ask these should questions, it is these kind of questions that really bring about a critical theory approach to the world. You might have heard right now the big buzzword is critical race theory, right? Taking a look at um, the institutionalized historic racism in our country. And right now the big question is, right, well, can that be taught in schools? And I don't know if anybody's been keeping up with it, but depending on which state you're in, that's a really big question right now, right? How do we handle institutionalized, systemic, historic racism, and how do we look at that um, educationally, academically? And the answer to that is critical race theory, which is developed by political theorists to say there is systemic racism in the US, and here's how that is affected, has been affected, and how it should be handled. So very interesting real world uses. So there are a ton of theories, different kinds of theories out there, schools of theories, but I'll put just a couple of the most notable, probably the ones that you might actually know, up here. And if you like theory, definitely get into it. Common ones here: liberalism, realism, Marxism, feminism, and one that you probably don't know the name for, but is very influential in today's society, which is post-structuralism. And just kind of touch on a couple of these just so you're familiar with them. So liberalism is kind of one of the liberalism and realism are kind of the foundational theories in political theory. Liberalism is sort of the foundational human nature argument that human beings are inherently judgy, that we do cost benefit analysis every time we make decisions, that we cooperate with each other when it's to our advantages, and maybe not so much when it's not. Realism is about sort of um, common interest for the betterment of me and all. Um, Realism is a little bit like that, but even more dog eat dog than liberalism. Realism says people will, always do what's in their own self-interest and basically, like screw the rest of the world. And when you apply both these theories of human nature and apply them to political nature, then you can say, well, states act this way. And, this is, they believed at the time, the individuals who constructed these theories, that they were arguing over descriptive, right, the way the world is. But now we realize that if you believe these theories and you act this way, it's actually prescriptive. So like the USA right now is living in a very neo-realist time where all of our actions on the international realm are very much Americentric, right? We only do what's in our best interest. America first. We help our allies because they're going to help us, not because we just want to help people. And so technically, this is a descriptive theory, but yet we know that other countries don't act this way, so it's not really descriptive because people choose if they do this theory or not. Marxism you're probably familiar with. Marxism was the first critical theory, which basically said, okay, the world isn't the way it should be, and here's what we can do to make it better. We need to basically do away with class distinctions, and stop hogging all the resources at the top. Was kind of Marxist big thing. Feminism, hopefully you'll read about some more feminism throughout the rest of this module. And feminism is all about equality. And then post-structuralism is the one that you probably know, but don't know the name for. So a post-structuralism came after structuralism, obviously. And post-structuralists say that there is no big T truth or big R reality, that we all of us have our own truths and that we all of us have our own realities. And a post-structuralist would say that, you know, there is no set parameters for what makes something real or not real. So um, a post-structuralist I know said that each of us is like a star out in the universe, and together all of our stars make up the universe, but no one star can see the whole universe. So it's kind of that idea that we have our own realities and our own truths that we cling to. Um, and it's very popular in today's society that there's no such thing as right and wrong. There's only what's right for you or wrong for you. Um, that there's no such thing as morality in and of itself. There's only morality in context. So it's kind of a big theory, a big change from structuralism. All right, so there are so many theorists out there, and one of your assignments is to read through just a quick blurb about each one. So I was going to touch on one that wasn't there. So Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner, um, United Nations ambassador, all those things. Amartya Sen came up with a theory called the capability approach, which was a unique way of looking at development. Before Sen, there was sort of a linear development model, right? That everything would progress along certain paths. And it was Sen who sort of devised the theory that development has to be tailored to the needs and the capabilities of the people. His example is pretty famous, is if you have somebody in a third world country who needs to get to work and is having trouble getting there because it's so long of a walk, that the answer was always, well, provide bikes. But then if you go there and you take a look at the area and you say, well, you know what, this isn't going to work because the people I'm trying to provide bicycles to help them get to work, the way to get to work is actually up a river or up a mountain, or they don't have legs. And so a bicycle is not going to fix this problem because the person or people do not have the capability to use this development model to actually help. Likewise, if you were trying to help, develop tribal people in the jungles of Brazil, and you showed up with a gas-powered chainsaw to help them cut down trees to build their homes. If they don't have gas, then the chainsaw is not going to do them any good. So, I mean, it seems logical, like it makes too much sense, right? But nobody had codified that, written that down before Sen came up with it. So, pretty interesting. So, another theorist, Martha Nussbaum, you'll read about her if you haven't already in this module, and she talks a lot about needless gendering. And just thought it was kind of fascinating. I was having a talk the other day with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about how much of our society, how much of the world, right, is needlessly gendered. And if you understand this through a feminist lens, it's pretty interesting. You think about right now with the issue of pronouns, right? There's this big push for pronouns, right? Is they an appropriate pronoun for a non-binary person? Should we still assume the he's and she's? Should we create a non-gendered singular pronoun? Is the he/she appropriate? Should you choose your pronouns at the end of your email, right? All this about pronouns, and if you think about it and you really go back, you wonder, why are pronouns needlessly gendered? What does this say about the situation? Like, if you were going to use a pronoun about a person, then why do you need to know that person's sex? Because you think about it, pronouns actually originally weren't gendered, they were sexed. So, kind of joking, and said, well, I mean, you might as well just say, person with a penis or person with a vagina. Like, why is that important to the conversation? You're like, oh, yesterday I was talking with this person who had a penis, and like, what? Why is that important? So, needlessly gendered. And in conclusion, I just want to remind you of this quote from your discussion question. Robert Cox, who says that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. And hopefully you guys are looking at that discussion figuring out exactly what that might mean. But the long and the short of it is, theories are not created in vacuums. You know, the original theorists, Immanuel Kant, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, sort of the foundational theorists that we study in political science, you know, they were living in um, a time, a patriarchal time of Western expansion and of war and conquest. Of course, they would come up with theories that said that human nature is prone to war, prone to violence, selfish, right? And then, like, even theories today, like, what's going on that this theory is pertinent? Um, we kind of have this belief that theorists are writing with the best of intentions to try to be as accurate as possible, and that may not be the case. You know, everyone who writes is writing to an audience. Um, who 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 wants to hear this, or who needs to hear this, um, is always part of a theorist writing. So anyway, hope that helps.